Travelers are adapting to a new experience when flying these days, with airlines having to change the way they operate and interact with passengers in this age of the coronavirus pandemic. Brad Japhe is a travel writer and has recently flown back and forth between New York, LA, and Hawaii, where he is now. And he's joining us to talk about what it's looking like in flight, and he can also tell us what we can do to prep before we get on board. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Aubrey. Good morning.
Good morning. So you're a travel writer, and I'm sure a lot of your research and work involves spending time on a plane, and you have continued to fly during the pandemic. Tell us what's changed when it comes to getting on board for flights.
Well, there's definitely some protocol in place that frequent travelers, most notably that you board from the back of the plane, the front.
Oh, the back.
And, they're doing their best to try and keep people separated and respect social distancing of 6 feet as you board the plane, and also when you deplane, which is quite a challenge. If you've ever flown, I'm sure you realize that once you land, everybody's jumping up to get their luggage off those overhead racks. And so now you need to kind of be a little bit mindful that you're only going to deplane, in a very methodical and organized fashion.
Yeah, I guess you do need to hang back. You can't just jump up. I mean, you could, but probably not a good idea. We've also heard, airlines are blocking middle seats, or they've implemented other measures to social distance. But like you were just saying, is it really possible to do that on an airplane?
Yeah, so just to kind of correct something that you'd said before, I traveled for the first time recently for a family situation. I definitely have not been traveling, for work. And I would highly advise against that because of what you just say here. It is impossible to really maintain social distancing practices when you fly in an airplane. So my advice to anybody would be do this only if you really definitely have to. If you're thinking about taking a, trip to, some warmer climate or something this summer, maybe consider a road trip, but flying, it's going to be a little bit problematic. And best practices, I would say, is that, you're going to probably expose yourself if you're sitting next to somebody. It's going to, there is that very high probability of exposure. So best practices would be wherever you're going when you're flying someplace to just self-quarantine, I would suggest, for a couple of days at least after you get to wherever you're going.
I hear you. Now, you talked about boarding from the back of the plane. What about those in-flight services? Are flight attendants still operating in the same way? Are they coming up and down the aisle?
Yeah, so I recently wrote an article about this and spoke to a lot of epidemiologists. I had to learn how to pronounce that word as well, which is pretty difficult. And what they were telling me is that the highest risk factor actually in these enclosed spaces is the shared surfaces. And so they have done away with the cart service. You won't see cart service coming back for quite some time, and you won't see in-flight purchases. So there was a lot of press that was made, a lot of hoopla a couple of weeks ago about certain airlines getting rid of their alcohol purchases. And that didn't have to do with the alcohol so much as it was that people have to swipe credit cards and they have to pass this credit card machine. They're trying to do everything that they can to eliminate people that, touching the same thing that other people would touch. That's a very high risk factor.
Well, can you bring your own alcohol? Should you bring your own snacks? Are they giving you anything on the plane?
Okay, so most airlines in economy class are giving you like they'll walk up and down the aisle and give you plop down on your lap, basically, like a little baggie that has water in it, because it's definitely always important to stay hydrated on a plane, and like maybe a stroopwafel or biscuits or whatever they're giving out that day. But don't expect anything more elaborate than that. Certainly bring your own snacks if you think that you're going to get hungry on a longer flight. And when it comes to alcohol specifically, there is an FAA regulation that says you cannot serve yourself alcohol. So it's kind of a sticky situation because you can bring your own alcohol in those little small containers onto planes, but it is against the FAA's regulation to administer it to yourself. There is maybe one or two airlines that will, as a workaround, will let you give the little bottle to the flight attendant, who will then administer it to you. I know that JetBlue had done that, but it is against most airlines' policies, the legacy carriers, United, American, and Delta, for you to be drinking your own alcohol at all.
Okay, good to know. And if you are going to eat and drink on the plane, does that increase your risk of getting COVID-19?
Yeah. So the doctors that I talk to, surprisingly, because there's nobody sitting in the middle seat and because you have a little bit of distance, when you take your mask off, that's not as big of a risk because you're not going to have somebody talking or breathing at you when you're eating, presumably. The bigger risk actually is that, you've been touching things while you're sitting down on the plane and then you go to eat your food. So always make sure to administer the hand sanitizer, couple little sprays right here.
Very nice.
As we're all very used to right now, directly before you eat, though. A lot of these products don't have long-lasting efficacy. So, you might have just used it 5 minutes ago, but then you closed your window shade or you touched the back of the screen on the television, and then all of a sudden your hands are potentially infected again.
Right. So sanitize often. Brad, you have a lot of great insight. Where can our viewers go for more information and advice that you have for traveling?
You can follow me on Instagram at journeys_with_Japhe, Japhe. That's my last name. But I would just recommend, as your previous guest had suggested, the CDC keeping up with their guidance, I think is really, really important because things change frequently, as we all know. It was only a couple months ago when I was writing a story in January about face masks, and nobody in the CDC was recommending it at the time.
All right, Brad, I'm going to have to stop you right there because we're running out of time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.